All right, so this is page 5 from the Percent Math Pack. Now, if you take a look, page 5 is all one specific thing you need to do for all the questions. You're going to take the percent and you're going to change it to a decimal and a fraction. So, let's take a look at number 1. Number 1, I'm given 13%, and I need to write it as a decimal and as a fraction. So 13% as a decimal, to change a percent to a decimal, I divide by 100, and I move my decimal spot 2 spots over so that I end up with 0.13 or 13 hundredths. So I've taken my percent and I've changed it to a decimal. Next, you're supposed to write it as a fraction as well. So you take your 13%, and when you're changing a percent to a fraction, you take your percent, you put it on the top, 100 on the bottom is your new denominator, and then you try to find lowest terms. This one's already lowest terms because, of course, 13 is a prime number. The only thing you can divide into 13 is 1 and 13. And I can divide 1 into 100, but it will get me the same fraction. If I take them both and divide them by 1, I'll still have 13 over 100. And I cannot divide 100 by 13. So it's already lowest terms, I can't make it smaller. Let's also do number 2. Number 2 is 7%. 7% changed to a decimal. I divide by 100. So I put my decimal at the back of the number and I move that decimal spot 2 over. Now I've got an empty spot. So what do I put? When I have an empty spot, I have to put a 0. So now I have 0.07 or 7 hundredths. 7%, 7 hundredths. And then I need to do the same thing by changing my percent into a fraction. Whatever your percent is, that's your new numerator. 100 goes on the bottom, and it's already lowest terms because 7 is a prime number. So that's how you do all of the questions on page 5. Exactly like this. You change your percent to a decimal by dividing by 100, and then you change your percent to a fraction by putting denominator of 100 and finding lowest terms. Remember, if you have any questions, then make sure that you get in touch and ask me how to do it. We're going to move on now to page 6. So I'd like you to take a look at page 6. Page 6 is once again doing exactly the same thing for all of the questions. All of the questions, you're given a fraction, and you need to rename it as a percent. Now, fractions to percents, usually there's an easy way to do it if you can take that fraction and change it to a denominator of 100 evenly, like equally. A lot of these you can, but some of them you can't. So let's look at how you do it both ways. Take a look at number 1. For number 1, I have 7 over 8. Now my math facts tell me that I can change 8 by timesing by 12.5. So I've got my 8 times 12.5 is 100. 7 times 12.5. So you might have to do an outside calculation here, or you can use a calculator if you so desire. It's up to you. We'll do an outside calculation where I take my 12.5 times by 7. 7 times 5 is 35. Carry your 3. 7 times 2 is 14, plus the 3 that you carried is 17. Carry your 1. 7 times 1 is 7, plus 1 is 8. I have 1 decimal spot in my question, so I'll have 1 decimal spot in my answer. So now I have 87.5 which means that's my new percentage. Remember that if you have a denominator of 100, whatever's on the top, that's your percentage. So that's how you figure out what your percent is going to be if you can take your denominator and turn it into 100 easily. Like if it's part of those math facts that we learned back on the lesson. But there are going to be some times where that's not going to work. Like if you take a look at number 12, or actually we can just look at number 3. So just take a look at number 3. So number 1, the 8 can be changed to 100 using the math facts that we learned. Number 2, you've got a 5 as a denominator. Well, you can change that to 100 by timesing it by 20, part of the math facts that we learned. So number 2, you're going to do exactly the same as number 1. But number 3 has 7 as a denominator, which means you can't change it to 100 equally, evenly, easily, the way that we did with the other ones. They're not part of our 100 math facts. So you're going to have to use division. So take a look at number 3. You've got 6 over 7. Like I say, there's no way to turn 7 into 100 using our 100 math facts that we learned before. So when you have a case like that, you have to take your 7 and divide it into your 6. Once you take your 7 and divide it into your 6, then you're going to be able to find your percentage. So you take your 7 and then you take your 6 and you divide them. So put your 7, on the outside. Morning, Tom.
Morning.